The sun was a molten brand, searing the vast, unbroken sky, its heat pressing down upon the land with merciless weight. Julia Carter's cracked lips parted as she drew a shallow breath, the air itself dry and unyielding. Her skin, once fair, was darkened by sun and dust, her dress torn and stiff with old blood. The wind carried the scent of scorched earth, rattling through brittle sagebrush as if whispering secrets of the dead. She knew then, with cold certainty, that she had been left to join them. The wagons were gone. Not a trace of them lingered on the horizon, not a single glimmer of iron-rimmed wheels, no dust trail curling into the sky, just an empty expanse of desolation. Her hands trembled as she pushed herself upright, the movement sluggish, each muscle shrieking protest. They had abandoned her, like a spent cartridge, discarded without thought or hesitation. The night before, when they had made camp by a withered creek bed, Julia had sensed the shift in the settlers' eyes. They no longer looked at her with sympathy or even pity, but with something colder, practicality. The wagon master, a man of thick shoulders and a thicker scowl, had spoken quietly to the others, his words lost beneath the murmuring wind. Julia had known what was coming, but knowing had done nothing to stop it. They had not even left her a horse. She staggered forward, her boots dragging in the dust. A single canteen lay beside a rock where they had tossed it, as if that meager offering would ease their guilt. The water inside sloshed weakly, less than half full. She lifted it with hands stiff from exhaustion, took a careful sip, and forced herself to swallow past the tightness in her throat. She would not cry, not for them. Her husband Samuel had been shot a week past, a bullet tearing through his gut during a raid near the trading post. He had bled out beneath the punishing sun, his fingers wrapped weakly around hers, his lips forming words she could not hear, and now he was gone. She had thought grief would be her end, had thought she would simply waste away in the back of the wagon, her body as lifeless as the man she had loved. But the settlers had other plans. They could not afford dead weight. A vulture drifted in lazy circles above her, its black wings catching the sunlight. It knew. It had seen this before. Julia pressed her fist to her stomach, forcing herself forward, step by step. The land stretched in every direction. Hard-packed earth, distant red rock mesas, dry riverbeds that promised water, but delivered only dust. The heat had a weight of its own, dragging at her limbs, settling into the hollow ache in her chest. She walked because there was nothing else to do. She walked because to sit was to surrender, and she had not yet decided if she would. By midday, the world wavered at the edges, mirages twisting across the flat land like mocking specters. She had long since stopped wiping the sweat from her brow. It was better to let it drip than to waste what little moisture she had left. Her mind wavered between exhaustion and memory. Samuel's laughter, the way he had looked at her on their wedding night, the whispered promises of a future that would never come. Then she saw the shadow. It was small at first, little more than a suggestion of movement near the rocks ahead. Julia blinked against the sun, her hand tightening around the canteen. The shadow shifted again, resolving into a figure, tall, still, watching. A man. Her breath caught, her heart pounding in her chest, a mixture of fear and wild, desperate hope surging through her veins. She had no weapon, no means to defend herself, if he meant harm. But he was alone. That at least was something. The stranger did not move as she approached. He stood against the ochre-colored rock, his arms loose at his sides, the long barrel of a rifle resting easily against one shoulder. His face was cast in shadow, but she could see enough. High cheekbones, dark eyes that missed nothing, black hair pulled back in a loose tie. An Indian. The settlers had spoken of them in whispers, with fear and loathing. Wild men, savages, raiders, who took what they wanted and left nothing but bones behind. Julia had never met one. She had never expected to. Now there was no one else. She stopped several paces away, swaying slightly on her feet. He watched her in silence, unreadable. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat, thick and useless. She swallowed hard and tried again. Her voice cracked, weak from thirst and fatigue. She cleared her throat, squaring her shoulders. "I need water." The man remained motionless. A breeze stirred the dust between them. Then, slowly, he lifted his free hand, fingers pointing toward the canteen at her side. His meaning was clear. She already had water. Julia's grip tightened around the flask. Not enough. Silence. His dark gaze held hers, steady, assessing. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. Panic clawed at her chest. She took a stumbling step forward. "Wait!" He did not stop. Julia surged after him, her legs nearly giving out beneath her. "Please," she gasped, her voice raw. "Please." He paused. The wind whispered between them, the land stretching wide and empty in all directions. Then, with a slow deliberation, he turned to face her once more. He studied her, really studied her, the way her dress hung in tatters, the way her breath came shallow and desperate, the way her fingers trembled despite the effort to still them. She was nothing to him, less than nothing, a dying woman on a dying trail. But he was still watching her. The man exhaled softly, as if deciding something. Then he moved, stepping toward her in a way that made every instinct in her body scream, to flee. But she didn't. She couldn't. He reached for her. Julia flinched, but he did not strike her. Instead, his fingers brushed against her wrist, closing gently over her pulse. His touch was warm, solid, real. Then, without a word, he lifted her over his shoulder like she weighed nothing at all. The world tilted. She gasped, struggling weakly, but she had no strength left. The desert spun around her, her limbs heavy, her vision swimming. Somewhere in the distance, a vulture cried. Then darkness. Julia woke to the scent of smoke and unfamiliar earth. Her body sore in ways she hadn't thought possible. The world felt different, warmer, close. She tried to move, but a thick hide covered her, its weight pressing her down. Her fingers brushed against the coarse fibers of a woven mat beneath her, and slowly, cautiously, she opened her eyes. The room, or rather, the shelter, was dimly lit by the low glow of a fire, its embers pulsing with soft light. The walls were curved, made of packed earth and timber, and smoke curled lazily toward a small opening in the ceiling. It was not a place she recognized, nor one built by any settler's hand. Then she heard it, the quiet rustling of movement, and he turned her head sharply, pain lancing through her neck, and saw him, the Indian, the man who had taken her. He sat across the fire from her, his posture at ease but his eyes sharp and aware. He was mending something, a strip of leather, working the sinew through it with practiced efficiency. His long hair was loose now, falling over his shoulders in a way that made him look both untamed and wholly in control. He did not acknowledge her at first, letting the silence stretch between them, heavy with meaning. Julia's mouth was dry, her voice rasping. "Where am I?" The man didn't look up. "You are not dead." It was not the answer she wanted. She swallowed, glancing around, trying to piece together what had happened. "You're home?" she asked, though the word felt foreign in her mouth. He nodded once. She shifted under the blanket, wincing at the dull ache in her limbs. She had been carried far. She could feel it in the deep-set exhaustion weighing her down. Why? Now he did look at her. His dark eyes were unreadable, reflecting the firelight in a way that made them seem endless. "You were dying." She had nothing to say to that. It was the truth. Julia pushed herself up, feeling the heat of the fire seep into her skin. "You should have left me." A shadow of something, amusement, flickered across his face, but it was gone before she could be sure. He returned to his work, seemingly unconcerned with her. "I did not." The simplicity of his words unsettled her. She studied him, searching for some sign of his intent, but his face revealed nothing. Her fingers curled around the hide covering. "Her? What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice quieter now, edged with suspicion. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he set down his work, leaning forward slightly. Nothing. She wanted to believe that, but she had lived too long among men to trust it. Nothing came without cost, and yet as she sat in the warm glow of the fire, her body no longer shaking from exhaustion, she realized something unsettling. For the first time in days, she wasn't afraid. A new sound reached her ears, the distant murmur of voices, women's voices, laughter, conversation, the occasional sharp bark of a child. This wasn't just his home. It was part of something larger, a village. Her stomach clenched. If there were others, then her fate was not solely in the hands of the man before her. She was a stranger here, an outsider. She did not belong. And yet, she was alive. The man rose, stretching his limbs with an ease that only sharpened how weak she felt in comparison. He gestured toward a small clay bowl resting near the fire. Eat. She hesitated, her pride bristling at the command, but her hunger won out. She reached for the bowl, bringing it to her lips. The broth was warm, rich with the taste of meat, and herbs she could not name. She drank slowly, aware of his gaze on her. When she finished, she set the bowl aside, licking the last traces of moisture from her lips. "Who are you?" she asked. He regarded her for a moment before answering. "Tasso Hanoi," he said. It took her a second to register it. "Tasso Hanoi," she repeated, the syllables unfamiliar in her mouth. He gave a slow nod. Tasso. The name suited him. Strong, unyielding. She hesitated before saying, "Julia." His gaze held hers, something quiet passing between them. Then, with nothing more, he turned and stepped toward the entrance of the shelter, pushing aside the hide that covered the doorway. Warm light spilled in, and beyond him she caught her first glimpse of where she truly was. Outside, the village was alive with movement. Women worked at looms, their hands deftly weaving patterns into fabric that rippled like water. Children ran barefoot across the dusty ground, their laughter rising in the air. Men stood gathered near the edge of the settlement, speaking in low, serious voices. She swallowed. This was not her world. Tasso glanced back at her. "Come?" It wasn't a request. Julia hesitated, but in the end she had little choice. Her legs were unsteady as she rose, her muscles protesting with each movement, but she followed him. As she stepped outside, the sun painted the world in gold and amber, casting long shadows over the village. Eyes turned toward her, whispers beginning like the rustling of leaves. She felt them before she saw them, the weight of judgment. A woman approached, her gaze piercing. She was older, her dark hair streaked with silver, her posture both regal and stern. She studied Julia with open scrutiny, her arms crossed over her chest. "She is weak," the woman said, the words in a language Julia didn't understand. "Tasso," responded in the same tongue, his voice steady, unbothered. The woman's gaze flicked back to Julia, considering. Then, without warning, she reached out, fingers brushing against Julia's arm. A slight frown crossed her face. She spoke again, this time softer. Tasso nodded. Julia glanced between them, frustration rising in her chest. "What did she say?" Tasso met her eyes. "She says you are thin. You need food." It was not the answer she had expected. Julia swallowed, hard, trying to regain some sense of control over the moment. "Who is she?" "My sister," he said simply. The woman, Taasso's sister, gave a final glance before turning and walking away, her posture stiff with disapproval. Julia exhaled. Slowly. "She doesn't like me," she murmured. Tasso gave the barest hint of a smile. "She does not know you." Julia crossed her arms, bracing against the weight of so many eyes upon her. "And the others?" she asked. "What do they think?" Taasso was silent for a moment. Then, with quiet certainty, he said, "They wonder why I saved you." The words settled heavy in her chest. She wondered the same thing. She turned away, letting her gaze sweep over the land beyond the village. The horizon stretched wide and unbroken, the mesas in the distance painted in the colors of fire and dusk. It was beautiful, wild, a world untouched by the kind of men who had abandoned her. She looked back at Taasso, meeting his steady gaze. "What happens now?" He considered her for a long moment before speaking. "You stay." The finality of it sent a shiver down her spine. Stay. She had been given no choice when she was left to die, and now, once again, she was at the mercy of others. But this time something was different. For the first time since she had lost Samuel, since she had been cast aside like nothing more than a burden, she felt something unexpected. A chance, a test, and perhaps, if she was strong enough, to take it, a new beginning. The desert had a way of stripping a person down to their bones, of forcing them to face what they were truly made of. Julia learned this within days of her first lesson with Ta'aso. There were no soft introductions, no gentle easing into the ways of his people. If she was to survive here, if she was to stay, she had to learn. And learning, she quickly discovered, meant suffering. She had spent years watching her husband hunt, had seen men skin deer, trap rabbits, and carve up buffalo. But knowing and doing were two different things. The first time Ta'aso handed her a bow, she nearly dropped it, her fingers weak from hunger and exhaustion. He didn't offer her instructions, only a quiet, steady look before stepping back, giving her space to figure it out. She pulled the string, feeling the tension bite into her fingers. The raw strength required more than she expected. The arrow wobbled, uncertain, before she loosed it. It fell limply into the dust 3 feet ahead. A small noise, something like amusement, escaped Ta'aso. Julia's cheeks burned. That was just practice, she snapped, adjusting her grip. Ta'aso simply gestured for her to try again. It took nearly 20 attempts before the arrow finally sailed toward the target, a bundle of dried grass tied together in the shape of a hair. It missed, striking the dirt beyond it, but the motion had felt different, smoother. She set her jaw, determined. Ta'aso gave a single nod. Again. Day after day she repeated the motions until her arms ached, until her fingers were raw. The blisters burst, new ones formed, and still he pushed her. She told herself she hated him for it, for the way he barely spoke as he corrected her stance, for the way he simply walked away when she grew too exhausted to continue. But as the days passed, the hatred turned to something else, understanding. This was how they all learned. Not with coddling, not with false praise, but through the quiet expectation that she would endure, and she did. She woke before dawn, taking the bow in her hands without being told. She pulled the sinew tight, feeling how the tension had become familiar, a part of her. She loosed arrows until the grass hair had 3, 4, 5 shafts buried in its form. Then, at last, Ta'aso spoke. Tomorrow we hunt. A thrill of fear and excitement coiled in her belly. When the morning came, the cold air still clinging to the land, they set out. The sky stretched wide and pale above them, the scent of damp earth rising as they moved through low brush and rocky terrain. Ta'aso walked ahead, his steps silent, his movements fluid. Julia did her best to match him, but she felt clumsy in comparison, every shift of her weight sending a whisper of sound into the air. He glanced back once, his expression unreadable, then motioned for her to stop. She did. He crouched, pointing toward a set of tracks in the dirt, small, delicate. Rabbit. Julia held her breath as he signaled for her to nock an arrow. Her heart pounded. This was not a bundle of dried grass. This was life and death. She raised, the bow finding the balance she had practiced, steadying her breath the way he had shown her. The rabbit was there, half hidden in the underbrush, its ears twitching. She released. The arrow struck true. The rabbit gave a sharp cry, then stilled. For a long moment she could only stare. It was such a small thing, its body no larger than her hands pressed together. The warmth of life faded quickly from its form as she stepped forward, swallowing down the knot in her throat. Ta'aso knelt beside her, studying her face. He did not ask if she was ready. Instead, he handed her a knife. Her hands shook as she took it. The first cut was the hardest, but she did it. She forced herself to move through the motions, to push past the discomfort, to acknowledge that this was the way of the world, the way of survival. Ta'aso watched, but he did not interfere. When it was done, she exhaled, the weight in her chest shifting. He nodded once. Approval. For the first time since she had been left to die, she felt something close to pride. The days passed, marked by more hunts, more lessons. Ta'aso took her beyond the village, into the wilder parts of the land where she learned to read the wind, to recognize the shape of danger. One evening, as they returned, the sky shifting to hues of fire and violet, they reached a river swollen with recent rain. The current was strong, churning against the rocks. Tasso started forward, stepping carefully across the stones that jutted from the water, his balance effortless. Julia hesitated. "Come," he said without turning. She swallowed. Hard, testing the first stone with her foot. It was slick beneath her boot, the water rushing hungrily around it. She took another step. Another. Halfway across, the river roared louder, the next stone just out of reach. She hesitated, shifting her weight. Her foot slipped. The world spun. As she plunged into the freezing current, she barely had time to suck in a breath before the water dragged her under. The force of it hit like a fist, stealing the air from her lungs, tumbling her like a rag doll. She flailed, her arms reaching for anything, then a hand seized her wrist. Strong, unyielding. She was yanked upward, her head breaking the surface just as she gasped, coughing violently. Tasso pulled her onto the bank, gripping her arm as she choked on river water, her chest heaving. She looked up at him, shivering, the shock of what had just happened sinking. In his grip did not loosen. "You fear the river," he said, his voice quiet. She didn't answer. "You fear many things," her hands clenched into fists. "I am trying." The intensity in his gaze didn't waver. "Fear is nothing if you do not face it." Her breath still came in ragged gasps, her body trembling, but something about his words struck deep. She wasn't weak anymore. She knew that. She had fought for every bit of strength she had gained here, but fear still sat in her belly like a weight, and she hated it. She met his gaze, the fire of defiance sparking. "Then teach me." A slow nod. "I will." In the days that followed, he did. He made her cross the river again and again, until the fear dulled to something else. Respect, understanding. He made her climb the rocks, find her footing, trust the ground beneath her, and she did. The village no longer watched her with skepticism, but with something different. Not quite acceptance, not yet, but something close. And Tasso, she had thought. Him cruel at first, had thought him indifferent, but now she saw it for what it was. He had given her no less than he gave himself, no less than any of them. She was not just surviving, she was becoming. The sky hung low, thick with the scent of rain that had yet to fall. Julia tightened her grip on the knife at her belt, her pulse steady but sharp. The uneasy hush that had settled over the village told her that something was coming. Tasso had sensed it too. He stood a few paces ahead, his gaze fixed on the ridge beyond the farthest shelter, where the land sloped toward the open desert. They had seen the dust first, rising in the distance, the telltale sign of riders approaching. Now, the riders had come. Julia recognized them before she saw their faces. The settlers, the ones who had left her for dead. She should have known they wouldn't stay gone. The horses slowed as they neared, 5 men in total. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man, with a grizzled beard and an expression like old leather, reined in his mount and scanned the village with narrowed eyes. The way he sat in the saddle, the hand resting easy near his holster, told Julia all she needed to know. He wasn't here to talk, but neither was Tasso. "You got something of ours?" the man said, his voice flat, carrying on the wind. Tasso did not answer. Julia forced herself to step forward, her boots pressing into the damp earth. She kept her chin high, though every muscle in her body screamed to run. The man's gaze landed on her, sharp and assessing. He spat into the dust. "Well, I'll be damned. Didn't think you'd last a day out here." Julia's fingers twitched at her side, but she didn't speak. Let them underestimate her. It was the last mistake they would make. "She's coming with us," he said. The stillness in Tasso's frame was more dangerous than any words he could have spoken. "She is not yours," he said simply. The man let out a short, humorless laugh. "She ain't yours either." His eyes flicked back to Julia. "You made a mistake, girl. You don't belong here." She met his gaze, the weight of her past crashing into her all at once. The days of silence in the wagon, the quiet, pitiful looks, the whispered words when they thought she couldn't hear. "She's too weak. She won't last. Best to leave her behind." They had already decided she was dead. She took a slow step forward, her voice steady. "Then neither do you." The man's expression darkened. "You don't get a choice." Ta'aso shifted, the air between them taut as a wire. "She stays." The man's hand moved toward his gun. Julia saw it before it happened, the slight tension in his shoulder, the tightening of his fingers. But Ta'aso was faster. His knife was already in his grip before the man could clear leather. A warning. The other riders tensed, but none of them reached for their weapons. "Not yet." The man's lip curled. "We could cut you down right now." Ta'aso did not waver. "You can try." The wind howled between them, an unspoken dare. Julia could feel the shift in the air, the moment where words would no longer be enough. These men had come expecting to take her by force. They weren't leaving empty-handed. She felt the knife at her belt. She had trained for this. She had bled for this. The man's fingers twitched. Then it happened. His gun cleared the holster, but Julia was already moving. She dropped low, the way Ta'aso had taught her, the way she had practiced over and over again until it became second nature. The bullet missed her by inches. She lunged. Her blade found flesh. A sharp cry. A curse, the man's arm jerking back as blood bloomed across his sleeve. Ta'aso moved like the wind, his knife flashing as he closed the distance between him and the second rider. The others scrambled, their hesitation costing them. One man wheeled his horse around, already retreating. Julia turned, knife still in her grip, breath coming fast. The leader, the man who had left her to die, stared at her. There was something in his eyes now, something he had never looked at her with before. Fear. He pressed his wounded arm to his side, his jaw clenched. For a moment, it seemed as if he might try again, might push this to the bitter end. Then his gaze flicked to Ta'aso, to the warriors now gathered, weapons ready, and he knew. This fight was over. He spat again, his anger barely contained. "You think this changes anything?" His voice was quiet now, meant only for her. "You'll always be one of us, no matter how hard you try to pretend." Julia stepped forward, close enough that he had to look her in the eye. "No," she said, "I won't." He held her gaze a moment longer. Then, with a sharp jerk of the reins, he turned his horse. The others followed. The dust settled slowly as they rode away. Julia's breath still came in sharp bursts, her grip tight around the knife. She forced herself to loosen it, to let the tension bleed from her shoulders. The village remained silent, watching. Then Ta'aso stepped toward her, his gaze searching. He didn't ask if she was all right. He didn't need to. Instead, he said, "You fought well." A simple statement. A truth. She let out a slow breath, something breaking open inside her. For the first time, she felt it. She was not a burden. She was not something to be cast aside. She was more. Ta'aso held out his hand, palm up, waiting. Julia looked at it. Then, without hesitation, she took it.